Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study through the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We're currently in Genesis chapter 2, and we're at verse 7. Now, we've been talking about what did God create when they talk about man, the being of man. So we talked about the spirit of man, and we're gonna kind of get back to verse 7 because this is what he breathed, the breath of life right here. Man is a spirit, he has a soul, and he lives in a body. Except where that analogy breaks down is that God had created those parts to jail. He created those parts to exist together. And what we will see, of course, we know now, but we haven't got to Genesis chapter 3, that because of sin, the body dies. But I wanted to take a few, just some lessons to talk about, then understand that our spirit is what is the life of us, that our spirit and soul is the immaterial part, inseparable from one another, but we can be separated from our physical bodies. The promise of Jesus is our new bodies, we will be inseparable from that. Because, again, this is the effect of sin. So we said that our spirit, which is the real you, we are spirit beings that live in a body. Okay? Now, how do we know this? Because when you die, what is separated? We know that we don't lose consciousness. I gave you scriptures on that. I really talked about the scriptures. We didn't really actually go and read them, but we talked about them. Jesus talked about the rich man and poor man. That was a picture of going from the two individuals dying and then ending up in the excuse me, underworld, and they don't lose consciousness. We find Elijah and Moses stopping by, who have been dead for centuries, talking to Jesus. Well, what is it that we're seeing? It wasn't their bodies, but it was their spirits. So that's when we said we are spirit beings living in the body or existing in the body. Okay. The last time we talked about the soul of man. Okay. That is our mind, our emotions, our desires, and our wills. Okay. Now that is the kind of immaterial part, right? In other words, but it is the substance of it. I don't know how to explain it. In other words, you can't reach out and touch your soul, but we think, we feel, we have emotions. So I want to talk about now in verse 7 again, and then put that all together with verse 7. And let's read it again. It says, Then the Lord God formed the man out of the dust from the ground and breathed the breath of life into his nostrils, and the man became a living being or soul. So we said now our body, God formed the bodies, and again, this is a kind of a wonderful thing, even in the sinful state. But we think about the wonders of it. Our problems is that we're decaying because of sin, because of the curse. But just think about what God created. That God created man how God created man to exist. Now, because we only know mostly this side of our existence, which is the physical existence, we experience things through the senses. Okay? Now, this is important. Through the 5 physical senses, our eyes, our ears, our touch, our smell, and our taste, right? Those 5 physical senses, we contact the physical world around us. Well, what contacts the physical world around us? Spirit and soul. We process that. The mechanism of the body that God formed, right, with all of its senses, right? But he also created it for pleasure. Think about the meal, right? Think about what sports do for us. Think about, and yes, I'm going to come to it. Think about how God created the sex part, that we enjoy the sexual pleasure. And I'll get more into that later down, further down when he creates Eve. But just think about it. God created this. Things feel good. God created that, right? God created that. All right. So, but our bodies now. So through the five physical senses, we contact the physical world around us. Through the spirit, we contact the spiritual realm around us, and with all of that information, it feeds into our mind, our emotions, our desires, and our wills. Okay? So that's the complete being of man. The complete being of man. So he said, then God formed the man from the dust and from the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. All right. Initially, man did not or was not created to die. So death, when we talk about death, and I'm just going to mention it here, and I'll get more into it in chapter 3. That's where we're going to be introducing it. But death simply means separation. So from man's perspective, physical death is the spirit and soul from the body. Spiritual death is our spirit separated from God. Okay. Now I'm saying that because all of this was designed by God, created by God to gel together, spirit, soul, and body. Adam enjoyed fellowship with God, as well as fellowship with his wife, as well as really, now you want to talk about living your best life, right? Adam and them lived their best life. This was, think about, and then you think about the height of every sensory perception Adam enjoyed, whether it's sex, but think about this, food, right? Think about when something tastes good, right? We go, oh man, when things taste good, and Adam enjoyed that. Plus, the world was good, right? So it's not like I eat something, I enjoy it, and then get food poisoning. No, but it was good. Every sense, and then you had the mind and the emotions, everything just gelling right, because that's what God had created. Okay, and under this, like I said, we don't know. It is very possible that man, again, we can't live in the possibilities here, but what is interesting, I say that because chapter 3 did happen. And we can only imagine with thought what would have happened had chapter 3 had not happened. And but as we see here, the being what God had created, life without ending, in the sense that just in the normal course of things, life wouldn't have ended. And man would have lived, having children would have been effortlessly, so women, right? we don't. I'm trying to. Well, I want to keep it clean too. But I'm thinking about I don't want to be gruesome either. But just think about everything we do now and how it would have been. That's what I'm thinking about. Like, man, using the bathroom, right? Um, Here's the interesting thing: because of sin, would we have even need deodorant or need to bathe? Okay, these are just things that I'm thinking about because who knows, right? All right. I mean, again, we could go so with this. The initial creation of God as He's created when He created man, and then later woman. We're going to get to that in a moment. But as He's creating woman, the initial creation of God, how free man was, how inhibited. Okay, but again, not just sexually. I mean, you can think about how good the sex was. I'm jumping ahead a little bit later, but what I'm saying is everything to the touch. How the human body would have enjoyed the roses, right? I mean, just my point is, there was no limitations in that respect. Okay, so through my 5 physical senses, we contact the physical world around us. Through my spirit, I contact the spirit realm, the realm of God. So basically, Adam had the best of both worlds / realms. He would have fellowship with God, while at the same time enjoying the creation of the earth. We only, in a limited way, enjoy the physical. We don't know what it's like to enjoy the spiritual because we're spiritually dead. And now, of course, and we only by faith, of course, believe that we're born again. Okay? But just think what Adam experienced. Just think what Adam experienced. All right. So I'll get more into this later when we get down to Eve. But look at verse now, number 8. The Lord God planted a garden in Eden, in the east, and there He placed the man He had formed. Right? So that's the thing where He placed it. Now man's alive right now. Remember when God formed the body, He breathed in His nostrils the breath of life. Okay. So now He said, verse 9. Now this garden. Now that get this in mind here. What you have is the whole earth, and from what I can tell, the earth was one landmass at this time. Who knows? One landmass surrounded by the oceans. Okay, and then so but you have this one landmass surrounded by the oceans. Oh, who knows? I don't know if we can ever tell if it was one landmass. But the garden, right? What you did have is perfect temperature, perfect climate, right? No hurricanes, no tornadoes, no lightning storms. Okay. And remember, He said that the rain hadn't rained yet, but and then you had this garden. So then the earth itself was beautiful, right? Beauty beyond description. But then the garden was this was man's home. Okay? This was man's home. So the Lord God planted, verse 8 again, the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there He placed the man whom He formed. Now, when He says in the east, Moses is writing, depending on how you want to count the timeline, some 2,500 years after these events. Could be more, okay. But notice he said in the east. By the way, there was an east, a west, a north, and south, just like there was time. Eventually, you would have had time because remember, the earth still spun on a 24-hour rotation, 365 days around the sun. Those constant, though the law of physics were there and in place. Okay, so this garden is in the east. Now, some might believe somewhere in Africa, they believe that Africa was really kind of the birthplace of man, or the center, okay, which seems to be, again, I wouldn't get into a whole big discussion or debate over this. But he said he placed, the Lord God placed the Garden of Eden in the east, and there he placed the man whom he formed. Look at verse 9. And the Lord caused to grow out of the ground every tree pleasing in appearance and good for food, including the tree of life in the middle of the garden, as well as the tree of knowledge and of good and evil. Now, obviously, we're going to come back to this because it's certainly going to run out of time right now. But so notice he said he caused every tree pleasing. In other words, the garden was a special place of, again, additional immeasurable beauty. In other words, God laid it out for the man. God created the earth and then said, now, but this is going to be your spot. I just think about Adam, how, when we say literally, right? Literally, he had the world. Okay? Literally, he had the world. And I'm gonna go back to this because then it says, the Lord caused to grow out of the ground every tree, pleasing in appearance and good for food. And then it says, including the tree of life in the middle of the garden, as well as the tree of knowledge and of good and of evil. Now it's kind of interesting because we see two trees here, and we oftentimes we know about the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but not the tree of life. Again, I'll get more into that later. But as we see, man is now conscious. Okay, God breathed God breathed into him the breath of life. He's conscious, and then God places him in the garden. We'll pick it up with this because we're going to move on as we see God, as God is setting up the man. In other words, he's setting up the man, and at this point, his home is set up. And as I'm leaving, I might say this. It's kind of interesting that, because obviously we're going to get to marriage, and if we was to use this as a pattern, notice that before the wife kind of comes on the scene, the man has a job, a home to give her. I'll talk about that in the upcoming sessions. All right, guys. I'll see you in the next session. See you next time. All right.